The amount of resistance that I have encountered today getting the first episode of this podcast up has been interesting. But whew, for those of you who may see this little blurb before the actual podcast, and you know me, you know that I always talk about resistance, right? Resistance is what comes before you put out the thing that you said, or before you do the thing that you said you wanted to do. So it's almost like a little mini test, these mini tests that keep happening, that make you have to persist in order to put out what it is that you want to do. Anyway, welcome to the very first episode of the Society Podcast. I am your host, Rashida McKenzie, and this is going to be a space where women who have ever questioned their worth, second guessed their abilities, or just felt like whatever it is that you wanted to do, that somehow it needed to be perfect in order for you to get it done. And this is the community and the conversations that we have to just go on and let go and dispel that myth that in order for you to contribute what you feel like is your calling, that there are these perfect steps that you have to take in order to do that. And so part of that is learning where that came from in the first place, and then being willing to go through the process to unlearn it so that you can ultimately liberate yourself. And so this is going to be the episode that makes you look in the mirror. Okay. So what you just saw was a scene from one of my, what is the, I want to say favorite movie, but there's another word for that when there's something that you see that's so pivotal, and something that you see that's so pivotal, Lord, pivotal and important, that makes you see yourself. And so that's why I love using um cultural examples, movie clips, TV scenes, because it does something. It shows us ourselves. This is the moment where Violet, the main character, is so tired and just exhausted of having to be perfect her whole life. Since she was born, she calls it having to be fixed. And we experience that a lot as women, and particularly as Black women, where we feel like in order to be palatable, in order to be worthy, that we have to be put together. We always have to be ready for to present ourselves in a way that we hear it called excellence, but I always even think is like, is it excellence that we're actually striving for, or is that perfection? And really understanding the difference between the two. And so when she goes to shave her head, it's not just about letting go of her hair. She is at a moment in her life where she is ultimately shedding, releasing, and letting go of these self imposed expectations that she's built up over her whole life, whether she's got them from her family or she's learned how to operate like this in order to be successful in her career, or she has just learned it from being a part of this culture, right? She is having this in the mirror moment that is ultimately her saying that she's done and letting go of these self impose expectations that she's had her whole life. She's confronting who she is as a person and ultimately asking herself, who am I? Right? She is dismantling this idea of what has been her identity. And so this is why I love this movie, and this scene always brings me to tears because she is me. And if you are here, then I suspect that she may be you too. So for as long as I can remember, I have been that the straight A girl, the do what you're told to do um girl, the girl that gets it right, the girl that gets straight A's. And ultimately what I call this is like having a straight A mentality, right? Meaning that if you show up, you put in the work, you do the thing, then you get the reward. And for a long time, I really thought that that was my superpower. Like, if I come in a space, I am going to kill it. But ultimately, what happens with that is that it becomes a self imposed prison. And so, for a lot of you who have excelled professionally or personally in anything, what that does is it's almost the opposite of imposter syndrome. It's what I call suppression syndrome, because it keeps you from doing anything new. It keeps you from failing. It keeps you from allowing yourself to be messy, to be in process. You always are feeling like if you're not good at that thing, then you're not even going to go for it in the first place. So what happens with that is that ultimately you're afraid of being seen struggling or starting from a place that may seem small, right? It doesn't seem big enough for you in terms of what it is that you want to do. And so you avoid doing that thing. But by pushing that down, you put off whatever it is that you've been dreaming or thinking about. Place. Awesome. And so that is what keeps so many women stuck and on the sidelines. And so part of the reason why we have to be aware of what that is because it's systemic, right? It is the way that our culture is built. It's ultimately the way that we are taught how to succeed. We as women, especially Black women, have been taught that we have to be excellent at all costs, right? That you have to be 10 times better. And so having that constantly ingrained in your psyche means like what if you're not? What happens when you're not? And what happens when you are trying to put yourself out there and do a new thing? What happens when you're trying to take a new leadership role? What happens when you are trying to accomplish something that's next level to what you've already done? What happens? It becomes this cycle where that perfection is almost seen as our protection. And that's why it's so doggone hard to let it go. We're taught to just never let other people see you sweat. And so we've learned that our worth and who we are is tied to that performance. Something just because it's something that served you at some point in your life doesn't mean that it holds that same weight and where you are today. And if that's the case, then you get to let that go. You get to shed just like Violet did. So this is where you get to rewrite the narrative. One of my favorite quotes I heard Ayanla say at some point during my own journey is that anything that you've created, you get to uncreate or recreate. And that is so powerful because oftentimes, because we built this life, we think that we have to just continue on with it, where having the knowing that anything that you created, you can ultimately uncreate and put back together, or choose to let it go altogether. So that is the shift. So in the shift, the question that you have to ask yourself is, what if the only way forward is to let go? If you keep trying to do it perfectly, you're never going to allow yourself the opportunity to get to where you're going. You'll always be judging yourself on a metric that's here when we talk about the soft life, but I think the soft life isn't something that you get, it's something that you are, something that you allow yourself to be for yourself, softer to yourself, so that you can have the grace and the space to grow. And so once I realized that, a lot of things started to shift and change in my own life. And even deeper than that is understanding that this idea of unworthiness is just a complete lie. And that's why I wrote my book, my first book, called Give Yourself Grace, Girl, to help you release this idea of perfection so that you can reclaim your power, because the idea of grace is that it's already given to us, that you already have everything that you need, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to have to do the work to dismantle what you've been taught for 40 plus, 30 plus, 20 plus years about what it is that you have to do. And that's where the grace comes in, is allowing yourself the opportunity to really dig underneath where that stuff came from in the first place, and giving yourself again room to grow. Unworthiness is not who we are. It's a story that we've inherited. And just like Violet and Napoli Ever After, there comes a moment when you're going to have to decide, am I going to keep performing, or am I going to start living? I'm going to give you a couple of guided reflection exercises. So, when you get settled and in a place where you can either journal or even just sit with yourself, here's what I want you to ask yourself. When is a moment where you just felt that you've had to have it all together, and that somehow you weren't ready for what was being required? Maybe it was a time where you hesitated, so you didn't apply for the job, you didn't run for that candidacy or office, you downplayed your dreams because you felt like it was too big, or maybe the spotlight felt too heavy. I want you to think back to an instance where that has happened for you. Now, part two of that is I want you to rewrite it as if you were talking to your best friend about it. If she had brought that same thing to you, what would you tell her? What truth would you give her instead? Because we're really good at that. We're really good at hyping other people up, but not so much ourselves. But if I don't sit with myself and I'm not quiet and have that same self reflection for me, then that's when the noise starts to get in. That's when it feels like I need to be doing more. And that's where we find ourselves in that cycle that we talked about earlier, that ends up in burnout and exhaustion and in extreme fatigue. And so that is what we are preventing when we really understand how this idea of perfectionism just permeates our mind, our body, and our spirit. Every day this week, when perfectionism appears, I want you to practice this. If you hear it start to whisper, you have to get this exactly right. Respond with, I get to be a beginner. I get to be a beginner. When fear says, what if I'm not good enough? Respond with, I am worthy because I exist, not because I perform. When hesitation creeps in, Take one small action, even if it's messy, even if it's not perfect, even if it's terrifying. And here's the other thing I'm going to tell you, when this comes up, watch your mouth. Watch how you are talking to yourself. Watch what you are putting out there in terms of accepting those things as true. Really pay attention to that this week. It's time to stop waiting until you feel more ready or more qualified to pursue what God has given to you. It's time to start. If this spoke to you, then know that you are not alone. This is what society is all about and why I created it in the first place. Because I've been having so many conversations about this weight that we've been wearing that keeps us from being the change that we want to see. And it won't happen without you. So, this is a personal invitation for you to join the society community, subscribe, and share this episode with another woman who you know needs this message. I know y'all have been having these conversations too. So go ahead and share it with her. And if you're ready to take this even deeper to another level, to continue having this conversation, then I've got something coming up that you don't want to miss. You're just going to have to continue to follow in order to get that. And I look forward to diving into the next episode next Tuesday, where we start to examine why we think success only comes from struggle and how we can redefine achievement on our own terms. So you don't want to miss that. Thank you for joining. See you next week.